Hi, everybody. All right, cool. All right, I wrote this yesterday morning, and I have to say, great thank you for that introduction. It was awesome, but also just to inform for inviting all of us here. It is unique. I do a lot of public speaking. I have been, you'll see in a moment, an advocate of a bunch of things, so I end up doing a ton of talks to gigantic audiences sometimes, and I never get to do this story, and I think this theme of speaking about sort of our journey is really interesting and really important for all of us to be able to do. And I think it's kind of cool if you just reflect on your story as we all tell our stories, because, let's face it, that's what makes us each individually different and special, and that's what we all are. So I call this 10,000, based on that sort of adage, it takes 10,000 years to be good at anything, or 10,000 hours to be good at anything. That's the theme of this talk. Oh, I have to push the button. No one's going to do it for me. That's my dad. So I'm going to start. My dad passed away 7 years ago, but this is my dad when he arrived in Canada. He moved to Baffin Island from northern Scotland and immigrated. And that's him in a canoe lying on a caribou skin with a gun and a ton of stuff and reading a book, as he always was doing. And I started here because, in all of our lives, we start in our childhood of who and why we became who we are and what motivates and drives us. And for me, it comes from the fact that because of my dad, this is where I was born, in Baker Lake, which is the geographic center of Canada, and the town at the time, which was about 600 Inuit people, and my dad and my mom and my sister and I. And as a result, there's no road to get there. You got to fly there. It's a very remote place, but it's a really deeply important part of my beginning because my dad learned to speak Inuktitut. He lived in the Arctic for 18 years and worked throughout the entire Arctic, but there was this deep concept of my childhood about two fundamental things. One is the sense of a deep adventure, that the world is in a place of great wonder, and that the natural world is this great place to protect. And I don't think I ever understood this for a long time, but the opportunity to share the journey with you all has been an opportunity for me to kind of think about and reflect about how I ended up in the career I'm going to show you in a minute, with the specific things that became passionate. That's me on the left. I'm quite bald in that photo. I know I look like I have a super cool dread under that hat, but I don't. But this is me as a kid, and I put this up because our childhoods matter, right? And for me, there was a few things in my childhood that mattered, and if I really reflect on them, I spent a shitload of time in the wild, especially in a place called the Adirondack Park in upstate New York. So I eventually moved to Ottawa, and the Adirondacks are just south of Ottawa in the Adirondacks, and the Adirondacks, if you don't know, are the first park system ever in the world, and they call it Forever Wild, and so that term Forever Wild is something I hold really dear, and that's me doing the other thing I loved to do as a kid, which is building, making, and drawing, and so there I am supervising my uncle building the first building I ever got to be part of building. And this is me with my grandfather, who is the person you're going to start seeing a series of themes of people that became heroes for me, and I'll explain why. My grandfather taught me about the wild, but he taught me how to show up in the world because he was, professionally one of the most prominent historians in America. But personally, his best friend had a grade 3 education, and the two of them fixed tractors every weekend, and that's the story that I care most about and have carried through my life, of how we are connected to people, not to ideas or what people's titles or identities are attached to. And so he's my hero and my first hero I speak to, but the thing is, he wasn't my real grandfather. He's an adopted grandfather. My grandfather was an architect, and I am an architect, if I didn't make that clear already, but I even misspelled my grandfather's name here, which is awesome. But this is his name was Richard, but the truth is he really was a dick, and he did go by Dick, but he had an amazing career. So here I have this sort of origin story in the Canadian Arctic in a town of 600 people, and yet my grandfather, who had an affair, left my grandmother, and my grandmother remarried the guy I call my grandfather. He was a pretty significant architect. So he designed with Ed Stone the first Museum of Modern Art in New York. That's what that is. He ended up being the dean of architecture at Yale University, while Joseph Albers, who had been at the Bauhaus before, was the dean of art at Yale at the same time. And so my grandparents at this time had this amazing life in design and art. And then he had an affair and left my mom. And so I grew up kind of feeling that architects were dicks. And the thing is that I never had a relationship with this man. He ended up as a senior fellow at Harvard. He had quite a distinguished career, and I had zero relationship with him. And then I'm the only person in my family that chooses architecture. So you can imagine the conflict I feel about this reality as a kid, right? So I never got to know the stories of his life, but his friends were people that I've read all about throughout my career in architecture, right? So he hired Lou Kahn to come to Yale and join the Yale faculty in 1946. And that was when Lou Kahn, who is coincidentally my favorite architect, built his first major commission, which is the Yale Art Gallery, which is what this image is. So here I have this really conflicted story. Architects are dicks. I love nature. Those are the two stories of childhood. So I weirdly ended up going to school in the States. I lived in Ottawa, and then I went down to Cornell. And the thing is that if it takes 10,000 years to be 10,000 hours, I'm going to keep saying years, to be good at anything, I got really, really good with the 10,000 hours that I did, but not in architecture. I got really good in my real passion, which is ice climbing. So I ditched school constantly. I was the single worst student of my graduating class at Cornell, without question. So badly that when the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, wrote a magazine article that was 16 pages long about me, they called Cornell and said, "We'd love to hear more about Michael at Cornell," and none of my faculty remembered who I was. They're like, and eventually this old lecherous professor I had said, "I think I remember him. He had a really hot girlfriend." And I was like, great, that's the reason. Who's my kid's mom? I spent my entire university days becoming a professional climber and teaching and guiding climbing all around the world while pretending to learn architecture. So I figured by the end of Cornell, 5 years of architecture school, I had maybe 57 hours of actual time towards my 10,000 hours. So that leaves me 9,943 hours still to go, and that's a problem because I got to get a job. So I ended up with this job working for an architect who was quite famous at the time. His name is Cesar Pelli, who is another hero of mine. So this man, and what's really awesome in the closing circles of life is I'm living now, from Cornell, I went down to Yale, and in New Haven, Connecticut with eventually my kid's mom, and I ended up working for this man who designed the next generation of the Museum of Modern Art. And so if you remember that photo of the building my grandfather designed, that's the Museum of Modern Art. Caesar renovated it and then added to it. So here I am working for this guy that was the Dean of Architecture, the next one of a later generational Dean of Architecture at Yale, and worked on the same project as my grandfather. I'm like, oh, great, this is back, dick. But luckily, the office was right next door to Lou Kahn's very last building, which is the Yale Center for British Art, and I got to spend every rainy day having lunch in this space where I finally started learning a little bit about architecture and falling in love with the idea of what space and architecture has. And I figure at that time I knocked off another bunch of thousands of hours of relevance and learning, and I got down to 5,343 left. Which was awesome, but I was also spending 2 months a year climbing around the world, a lot of big Himalayan climbing and Alaska climbing and stuff. Somehow I was trying to marry these two things, right? Two opposite things. One, this deeply urban architectural life, and the other, this deeply commitment to the wilderness, to the wild, the forever wild part of my life from childhood. And this is my real love. Architecture isn't it. The wild is my love. And so I felt really conflicted all the time about how can I be in the city when all I want to do is be in the wilderness. And there's a man that then became, through my sport, became my hero. And if you don't know who that is, that's Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, who has to this day become the single person that probably has informed more about how I show up as a business person and as an entrepreneur in the world and how we run our firm here. because not only was he one of the most profound rock climbers in history, he's the founder of ice climbing. He really invented the tools of my main sport. But then he went on to create one of the most innovative companies in the world. In my practice, I have an adventure bonus for every staff member where they can basically ask me for a bonus to go out on an adventure. And I do that to honor that man right there. Because we as designers find different places of innovation. It might be going on trips to Europe, but I believe we find our greatest inspiration through really pushing our limits and experiencing the world in an extreme way. And so we support our team that way. So I was working for that guy, Cesar Pelli, and it was fun. I got to design this airport, which is Washington, D.C.'s airport, and I started getting pretty good at doing airports. I'm down to 1,316 hours left to go, and then this guy shows up in my life. So I buy this house in New Haven, Connecticut. It was built in 1855, because New Haven's old compared to Vancouver. And does anybody know who this guy? Come on, somebody show me a hand. Anybody know who that is right there? Thank you. Who said that? I'm going to give you a hug, Steve. So that is Norm Abrams. If you've ever heard of a show from PBS called This Old House, Norm is the master carpenter in Norm Abrams, and I learned more about architecture from that man than any other person I've ever experienced. Because buildings are made with things, and things have to go together with nails and other attachment points, and this man basically taught me how to make stuff and fall in love with the process of making. And I didn't have a dad that knew how to do that, so I learned it from him watching TV every Sunday morning and got really, really good at working in wood, which you'll see matters eventually. And I think he got me down to 892 hours left before I could get good at it. Through that, I got pretty good at making things. So I have a good shop, really good woodworking skills. I was watching him all the time on Sunday mornings to learn how to make things. And I built this building. So at this point in my career, I'd built my hometown airport, Ottawa Airport. It's a big airport. If you go to Ottawa, that was a building of mine. And the honest truth is, I sucked. I didn't know what I was doing. I was stressed out like no tomorrow. I didn't feel capable or competent to be doing these projects that I was being given. I'd done at that point maybe 10 airports in the world. And then I built this little building in my backyard. It's the size of a one-car garage. And at this moment, I was like, I think I might start to understand architecture. Maybe I know who I am a bit more. It's made out of the things I love. It feels like it's kind of sunken into nature in this corner of my backyard in North Vancouver. And maybe I'm starting to get this, and maybe I don't have to be what other people think architecture is about, and now I'm down to 134 hours left before I get good. And then, at that same time, these two arrived. So, on the left is Elsa, on the right is Makalu, named after the 5th tallest mountain in the world, and these are my two littles when we still lived in North Vancouver, but they were born in 2001, 2003, right when I started my firm. And I became a single parent when they were a year and a half and 3.5. Their mom and I split up, and I started parenting by myself and trying to start my firm. And all of a sudden, my value system changed. And my reflection of how I showed up in the world changed. Because so much of architecture, as I understood at that point, was about, celebrity. Like, make a cool building, get on a magazine, be celebrated. It'll be great. Do a nice house for rich people. It'll be fantastic. Spend other people's money. Like, so much of the industry was about that. And none of that resonated for me at all. And what started to shift was this moment where I became a single parent and was struggling, to be honest, with that experience a lot. And I reflected on the fact of what really matters to me and what I kind of needed to kind of reframe how I thought about the approach to making buildings. And why I did what I did. And I realized through adventure, I basically rebuilt my sense of identity on going on some really crazy adventures with my two littles when they were young. That's Makalu and I, when he finished and became the youngest person to ever kayak all 7 continents of the world. That's in Antarctica. He and I, when he was 9, kayaked the northern border of Afghanistan, and we're the only people that have ever done it. And through these insane adventures, but especially through this trip, I realized that my kids are the reason I do what I do. And what I mean by that is they are going to be on this planet longer than I am, hopefully, and they are going to have kids, and they are going to have kids, and they are going to have kids. And we live in these existential moments where for the last 120 years, we have known, science has known, that we can connect the dots between fossil fuels creating carbon emissions, creating climate change, creating an existential threat for humanity. That 120 years ago is the first moment scientists put those 4 facts together, 120 years ago. And yet my entire career, nobody seemed to care. All the famous architects in the world don't care. And here I am in an industry that represents 47% of the problem, and nobody cares. And I have kids that I want to build for, build a life for, and hope for, my 2 heroes, and I realized I had to change everything I did. That's the moment I realized I'd reached my 10,000 hours and I could start to practice architecture. And everything changed. And so I'm gonna go really fast, but it changed on the idea of legacy. It changed on this idea that what we do is build legacy, which isn't a whole bunch of nice, pretty buildings. It's about buildings that actually are going to somehow move the dial and make a difference in the world around certain really important things: social issues, justice issues, affordability issues, accessibility issues, climate issues. That is our role in society. It is not to put magazines on buildings on magazine covers. It is to do good in the world and to transform it, because we have kids and we have a duty to solve for them. So every book I've ever written always starts with the same saying, which is that it's the job of every parent to tell their kids they can change the world, but it first is our job to show them that we did. Because generation after generation has been handing problems off to the next generation rather than solving them. My kids are the reason I didn't want to keep doing that. I wanted to break that cycle. It had to change. So I sat down and started really working on the future of building. And in 2007, with my son, when he was 6 years old, I sat down and figured out how we could change the way we build skyscrapers, and that we could build them out of wood. And I wrote this book called Tall Wood that at the time was not received well by the industry. People thought I was insane. And I said, you know, we could actually build skyscrapers made out of wood. And we should, because wood actually sequesters carbon. Concrete buildings are the worst thing we can build. And I know we're standing in one, and the rest of our city's built out of concrete, but it's the single worst material we can build with for climate change. And that we need to transform the entire building industry away from steel and concrete, which represent about 12–13% of our carbon emissions, towards wood. And so we invented how to build skyscrapers. And this book then started gaining momentum, and I ultimately ended up doing a TED Talk, main stage TED Talk on the subject in 2013 that was terrifying. And I am an introvert, ultimately. I know most people that know me think that's crazy because I can show up if I have to. But this was the scariest thing I'd ever done. But walking on this stage, I had an experience on ice climbing in Scotland before this, where I broke my back ice climbing, and it's a long story I can't get through tonight, but basically I had this very life and death experience, having to escape the mountains with my climbing partner and I with a broken back on our own. And it empowered me to stand on the stage with Bill Gates in the front row. You can't actually see that, but Bill's right in front of me. And get on the stage and tell this story. And by telling this story, now I think 2.5 million people have seen this talk, and it's in 35 different languages in the world, and it changed the world. And that process came from not doing what seemed right at the time from my peers' point of view, who told me this wouldn't happen, but this belief that this connection of nature, our kids, our responsibility, is more than just making pretty buildings. That's the easy job. I try to make pretty buildings. That's the easy job. The hard job is making things that are meaningful. So I'm just gonna scan through a bunch of these really fast. We're one of Google's main architects now in California. That's what that is, actually. But these are our projects. I run a school as well. That was that one. This is in Sweden. We work all over the world. This is in Paris. It's just finished. Emma is our main photographer for everything. So like almost every photograph you're going to see is Emma's. And some of these are construction photos, so they're not that great. But we do a ton of indigenous projects. I'll pause here. This is on Baffin Island where my dad first immigrated, and it's the only Inuktitut language center in the world. And my dad's one of like 5 white Canadians that speaks Inuktitut. Because meaning matters, right? So I'm just going to kind of fly through to the end of this and be done in 2 seconds more. We're actually building the Royal BC Museum. That was the last slide, which is the largest. If you've heard the term mass timber, that's actually my term I invented and the world uses, so that's a fun fact. This is Ronald McDonald House, the most important project I've ever done. So you're just getting a snapshot. This is the first tall wood building. Oh, I want to go backwards. Hold on one sec. I'm going to stop here, and this is going to be my last slide. How do I get the video going? Anybody know? Will it go? Okay, here. So I just got to talk over the music. The music's O.C. Elliott, who are really close friends of mine from Victoria. But this is a project that knits together the story I just told. I love mountain architecture. This is a backcountry ski hut above, it's 2 days ski off of Whistler, the summit of Whistler. We're building this with helicopters next summer. It's fully off-grid. It's for 24 skiers to be able to spend the night. So I thought I'd share it just because it's like one of the many, many weird projects we get involved in, but this one for me feels like home because it takes all the love I have for our mountains and puts it into this deeply sustainable off-grid building and hopefully serves a possibility for Canada to be seen as a place that leads the world in sustainability and never follows again. And I'll just let this play out and then I'm done. It's almost painful not saying stuff. These are bunks for people. I'll just explain the project and we'll finish it out here, 2 seconds. If you're a backcountry skier, you can donate to this project, by the way. I was saying earlier, Brian Hill is a really good supporter of this project and one of our donors, but we're actually funded now to build this. And that glacier is real. That's what we look at from this thing. It's pretty remarkable. Europe has a lot of this. Steve knows in the Dolomites, it's like epic. But finally, Canada's going to get some pretty cool stuff happening in the mountains. Now I'll shut up.